Good morning, party people. Welcome to Cabo, Mexico, to my vacation. So I'm taking your professional development questions. This is the third in a series of professional development open Q&A where you sent me your questions, and now I'm going through and giving you probably really terrible answers. Forgive me. So first up here I have Proactive DBA. Proactive DBA says, I look around, I see a lot of SQL Server DBAs and tons of blogs as well. How can I be different from others? And part two, being junior, how can I, he's pointing to himself, not to me, I'm also junior. How can I get more exposed to things in which I haven't worked? Okay, so this is interesting. When you go to write a blog post or record a presentation, you're going to be tempted to Google, find a bunch of other people who've covered the same topic, and you're going to be like, it's all been done. It all has been done for the most part. But the thing is, you know how no one reads the documentation? You know, you may not be aware of this. Freaking nobody reads the documentation. No one reads the documentation. It's unbelievable. I get paid a really good living saying things that are in the documentation. Going, hey, here's what the documentation says. How's about we read it? And you have to kind of set that aside and go, what people are coming to you for is your point of view. Because the documentation's boring. It's incredibly boring. No one wants to sit around and read it because it has no character. What you want to do is think of it as you're telling stories about you and the documentation. You're bringing it to life with your voice and your sense of humor. You is what people are looking for, not as much the specifics of the documentation, because if they just wanted something with no personality, they'd read the documentation. So that's one part of it. The other part I'd say is, I know it's tempting to Google and see what else people have written. I will Google and see what else people have written, only because I want to frame mine a little differently. I'll just look at the Google search results for the topic that I'm trying to search and say, what's my title going to be, so that I can see that it sits differently compared to everyone else. I don't want to have the same title as someone else who covered the same topic. So the other part of your question was, being more junior, how can I get it more exposed to things in which I haven't worked? If you're trying to do it for career purposes, go to other people in your company, like expose yourself to more things inside the company. If you're doing it for professional growth, go answer questions at places like dba.stackexchange.com, stackoverflow.com, SQLServerCentral.com. And you might think there, it's all been done. No, there are plenty of questions sitting around there that will stump you, and it's kind of like playing a detective game. I don't personally find that very fulfilling, because a lot of questions aren't worded well. They are, someone clearly didn't Google. But if you dig, there are some diamonds in the rough inside there that will challenge you and challenge your ability to A, reproduce the problem, and B, explain the problem to someone else. It's kind of like a junior version of being a consultant. Being a consultant, people will bring me things that sometimes I haven't seen before, and then I get all excited because I'm like, oh, it's a new adventure, and I get to learn things that I haven't been exposed to yet. But it's by the time that someone calls you calls you in to do consulting work, they've often done the basics of, they've Googled, they've made sure that some of the basic stuff is in place. So it's just a higher quality of problem. Let's see here. Let me delete a couple of things here. Oh, several people have answered or posted stuff in. Let me go add these, add this, and add this. And oh man, there are all kinds of them. Let me go check a couple of things here and check that. Okay, so next up we have someone asks, admire that name. I'm working as a DBA, and in the team what I see is unorganized. There's no documentation about the environment. I tried to suggest, but as I'm new and the boss is dependent on one or two people, it doesn't work. So what is the right thing to do? The level of documentation usually depends on the size of the company. if you think about tiny companies all the way to big, huge enterprises, if you go down to your local dentist's office, there's no documentation on where the systems are plugged in, where the SQL Server backups are at, or anything like that. It's the receptionist. She knows exactly how she needs to put the backup drive in, or how it syncs up to the internet, or whatever. But it's almost never written down. As you go to larger and larger shops, by the time that you get to 5 or 10 DBAs, and I just mean 5 or 10 DBAs, not 5 or 10 sysadmins, but 5 or 10 DBAs, it feels like things start to be more written down. But until you get to 4, 5, 6 DBAs at least, people don't usually write stuff down that often. Because if you only have 1 or 2 or 3 DBAs, the documentation would change so fast. It would be out of date so quickly. And there's no one there who needs to read it. Like, the team kind of knows each other. When some of my questions and answers, I'll recommend writing a checklist down so that you can mentor a junior. But I'm only saying that because most shops don't do it. And you kind of got to suck that up. When you're new to the team, you don't want to throw stones right away and say you're doing it wrong. Some of what the company hired you for was a fresh perspective, but sometimes you want to listen and watch for a while before you say you're doing it wrong. And I would say, when you talk about, you didn't say how big the team is. You say the boss is dependent on 1 or 2 people. If there are only 1 or 2 people who really know what they're doing in there, they may be so stretched to the limit that they just have never had time to write documentation, and the boss hasn't prioritized it. Because some bosses don't prioritize documentation. You can go write your brains out and then put it down, go, here's what I did today, and they can be like, screw you, you need to go solve customer problems. I don't agree with that. But that's the way that some managers think. So what I might start by is going to the manager and saying, what are the biggest problems here that you hired me to solve? And then tailor your work efforts to the manager. If the manager says, I'm so frustrated because I only have 1 or 2 people that I can count on, the rest of them don't know what they're doing, and those 1 or 2 people, they refuse to write down what they're doing, then that's the sign that the manager prizes documentation. But if they don't say that, you may not be anybody's hero if you die on the documentation hill. Next up, 44 years old and tired of infrastructure says, are you ever too old to change careers and get into database administration? Let me tell you about my father. Growing up, my father worked for Goodyear, the tire company, and he would travel we would move every 1, 2, 3 years, move to different cities for different Goodyear stores, and help either turn around Goodyear stores or open new Goodyear stores for, I guess, the corporate office. And eventually, after moving around so much, my parents kind of gradually grew apart, and they got divorced when I was in my early teens, I guess. And my dad had a little bit of a crisis. He was like, I don't like what I'm doing here anymore. Started over from scratch, and said he'd always wanted to be a doctor, but he couldn't because he was colorblind. Or that's what they told him at the time, back in the 50s, 60s, whatever. And when he had this midlife crisis, he all of a sudden found out that he could become a nurse. And even though he was colorblind. And so my dad put himself through nursing school, working and going to nursing school evenings and nights, just insane amount of work and weekends. And it was always kind of funny because he finished his next set of college degrees before I could finish mine, because I dropped out of college. It just wasn't for me. So not only did he change from tires over to nursing, but he did such a great job at nursing. He worked in emergency rooms, managed triage nurses, got to the point where he was managing all of the nurses in one wing of a hospital, and then managing all of the nurses. See a fishing boat going by. So is it possible? Yeah, absolutely. You can totally shift gears. But it's how bad do you want it? How bad are you willing to work for that? Are you willing to do all this extra learning after hours? And I shifted careers too. I used to work in hotels before I went back into IT. There's gray hair here for a reason. I think there's also a growing shift in the economy towards more gig workers. I think that long term, 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, everything's going to be gig workers, and we're just going to be hired for short, specialized bursts. I feel like I'm that way already. Companies hire me for 2 days and then they're out. Like I'm just like an emergency room surgeon for SQL Server. There are lots of companies that I just get them bandaged up off to the races, and I'm like, if you ever need me again, call me, but otherwise I think you're set for now. Some companies I have long-term relationships with, but a lot of them I just bandage them up and they're off to the races. I think that there's going to be more of that gig worker type stuff in the future, and there's a rocky road in between where we are today, where everything is a career. People think that they're going to be in the same career for 20, 30, 40 years, and more towards gig work. It's going to be an interesting time to watch and see. But 44, it's not that bad. I'm older than that. I didn't change older, but my dad did. A non-DBA says, as in anon, like anonymous, how do I start blogging when you don't feel like you know everything? He says, although knowing everything is impossible in this field. You're not blogging things you don't know yet. I always think of the database administration career, or like any technical field, as a triangle. There are a whole lot of people, or pyramid, sorry, it's a pyramid scheme. There are a whole lot of people at the lower levels. There are less and less at the higher levels. You're making the mistake of saying, looking up on the pyramid and going, I want to blog to impress people who are above me, or I want to blog to impress people who are on my level. Nope. You're blogging for people who are below you on the pyramid on how to get to your level. The things that seem obvious to you, the thing you did yesterday is the thing you should be blogging about, because the thing you did yesterday, you didn't always know how to do it. Maybe you didn't even know how to do it yesterday. Maybe you Googled your way through it. And you're always going to feel like an imposter for blogging that kind of thing. You're like, well, either you're going to feel like everybody knows this or everybody should know this, or else you're going to feel like I don't really feel qualified to blog about this. Focus on the everybody should know this, because those are the people below you. That's what they need help discovering this. Yeah. All right. Next up, Board DBA says, I've been a DBA for a decade or more now, but the passion has gone. The thrill is gone. I've got a cushy job where I spend my days doing a bit of dev work and a bit of day-to-day babysitting for a couple of servers. I keep getting promised Azure, but it never appears. How do I enjoy my work again? Wow, that's a really interesting question. How do I enjoy my work again? Philosophically, there are points in your life where it's better to take easy money off the table, to just rake those winnings in. You've put in your time and you're just raking the money off, and you find enjoyment in other parts of your life. You find enjoyment in hobbies, giving back, volunteering at a local pet shelter, volunteering. I'm going to say things that don't work during COVID-19, but volunteering as an usher in a theater. A friend of mine worked as an usher in a theater that did musicals, Broadway show type things. It was like the world's most overqualified usher. The guy was making great six-figure income, but he loved seeing shows, and he loved seeing them over and over again, and he would get so excited to be an usher and felt like he was giving back to the community. Another friend of mine is a museum docent who gives tours of museums. The thing you get enjoyment of doesn't have to be your career. It can be something else. If you're lucky and you find the thing that makes a lot of money in order to sustain your hobbies, and you love doing that too, then that's great. But it doesn't have to be. So I would say maybe you're at the point of your career where, especially when you say cushy job, where you want to find a hobby. Go find the thing that you think that you love to do. So that's one. The second one is people think that their hobby and their career can't be the same thing. There may be something that you're passionate about, and I'm going to say motorcycles. Let's say you're really passionate about motorcycles. Well, you know what? There are motorcycle companies out there that run SQL Server that you can be their DBA. The Spaghetti DBA in the SQL Server community, Spaghetti DBA on Twitter, is a DBA for a Formula One racing team. You know, there are all kinds of hobby type things that you're really passionate about that use SQL Server, and if you get a job working at one of those companies, all of a sudden your work can feel reinvigorated again, like that you're happy with what you're doing. Even though the topic didn't change, you're still doing the same tasks, but it feels like it has more meaning because you're doing it at a company that's connected to something that you're passionate about. So that's another solution. The third solution is take a serious risk, like go to work for a .com, go to work for a startup, something where they are stringing things together with baling wire and duct tape, just barely hanging on. If you want excitement, find a startup or a nonprofit that's working in a space that you're passionate about. But I gotta warn you, there are gonna be a lot of times where you're gonna be like, I really wish I had a cushy job, especially during the pandemic where there are a lot of people who are losing jobs that are not so cushy. So hopefully one of those three answers gets you started there. Next up, Proud DBA says, how should I deal with managers that are constantly lecturing you about SQL Server, but they're completely wrong almost all the time? Maybe they read something once and they think that it's enough to become an expert. Put yourself in their shoes, I think. They are trying to share something that they're excited about, that they care about. They're wrong, or you think that they're wrong. Maybe they were right at one point in time. That's the thing that I always come at with when someone's a manager, they were a database administrator 10, 20 years ago. There are a lot of things that were true 10, 20 years ago that are just not the case now. Your fill factor should be set to 70%, ridiculous stuff like that. But the things that were true at one point, back when we stored our data on spinning magnetic rusty frisbees. So you kind of want to just go, okay, they're proud, they want to share something that they know. You have to make the decision. Do you want to pull their pants down and prove that they're wrong, or do you want to just let it be and just kind of treat it like a 6-year-old who's coming to tell you, hey, guess what, today I learned about He-Man, he was a, or whatever. That tells you how out of date. I'm not around kids. I don't know what the new action hero is. Pokemon, which I'm sure even that's outdated. But you kind of just think of it as, oh, okay, oh, that's interesting. Oh, cool, tell me about the old days, Grandpa. Or just whatever it is that makes you feel better. Don't patronize them, but just, oh, okay, cool. And then let it go. Just that person is excited to tell you something just like a child is, and okay, cool. Now, if they're trying to get you to do something different, go to my blog, go to brennozar.com and search for consulting lines, and I have a whole series of lines that I use with managers, and I'm having you go there rather than give you one specific line, because you may find one of several that you enjoy inside there. For example, one of them that I've used with managers are like, no, this is exactly how I do it. I'd be like, oh, here, would you mind showing me? Here's the keyboard. Would you mind showing me how that's done? And then when they go in and go, well, this is different than Enterprise Manager and Query Analyzer that I used to use. Oh, yeah, no, times have changed a lot, but go ahead, keep going and show me what you got there. And then they'll go, why don't I maybe just give this back to you and let you do your thing? Okay, cool. Carry on now. Go back to having meetings or whatever it is that you do. It's funny. Next up, Ghost of Database Administration Future says, I'd like to expand my database knowledge. I love the training you've created, but would you please start teaching Postgres? No. I feel like I would be a fraud if I taught Postgres. I don't want to teach Postgres until I can explain the query optimizer. There's a cat going through the restaurant there. It's an outdoor restaurant, obviously. It's not indoors here. I'm not going to teach Postgres until I can explain the query optimizer. I have no interest in learning the Postgres query optimizer and how it works. It's not that I don't have interest. There's just only so many hours in the day, and you got to pick your battles. Like, I'm on a freight train to what can I do to spend more time with my family. That's really the whole reason that I work, is how can I be around my loved ones more and enjoy life more. And so I'm not going down the Postgres route. My ship has sailed. I'm completely on the SQL Server ship. I split my time about 50% in Postgres and SQL Server, but my time in Postgres is just as a user, not as a teacher. No, I'm not going to start teaching that there. Next up, Connie says, oh, wow. Connie says, how can I make the most of having a database administrator on my team who's more senior than myself, willing to mentor me in my current role? Oh, I love it. That is such a good question. Let me think about that for a second. And spill Diet Coke on myself. What I would do is think of life as a chess match where, you're not that you're playing them. I mean, like that you're up against the chess match of life, and you have but which says nothing. I haven't seen the Queen's Gambit. That just came out of nowhere. I just see so many people talking about the Queen's Gambit, and I'm like, I gotta go watch that, because I was into chess when I was in high school. You're on a journey. What do you want your resume to look like 3, 4, 5 years from now? What do you want to have on your resume that you don't have now? Then look at her resume and say, what do they have that I want to get to have? And literally just make up, go here, these are the 3 things that I want to be able to put on my resume. Will you teach me or talk to me about some of the things that you learned along that way? Can we maybe build it in the lab here to do some of that, or can I document those processes for you so that other people on the team can do it? But look at it as a targeted, I want these 3 bullet points on my resume, and because each of those bullet points, let's say it's build an always on availability group, each of those bullet points is going to take 2-3 months of spare time, especially when you already have tasks that you have to do in your job. So being very targeted and specific about just 2 or 3 bullet points you want to accomplish will help you then go to them and say, here are the 3 bullet points I want. Which one are you the most passionate about that you would like to teach me, and let's go build it over in our lab. That's the way that I would approach it. Michael says, what is your recommendation for vouching for past coworkers if you have not worked together in a few years? I'll be honest and just put the dates in there. When I worked with so-and-so between these date ranges, I was impressed with their blank. They were great at brushing their teeth after they came to work, drunk. They had phenomenal grooming habits for someone who was clearly out to lunch. Whatever it is that you want to say about them, but just say during those start, like a first lead in these 3 or 4 years that I met him. It's tempting to think that they're coming to you because they have bad current references. But what they may be coming to you for, and I say this because I know your name from recognizing you in the thing, what they may be coming to you for is that they respected your work and your opinion. And they go, I want this person's opinion on my references because they had their stuff together, whereas I'm working with a bunch of clowns today. So take it as a compliment. Let's see. Next up, Mache says, hi Brent, you often say as a consultant that you want to stand next to something expensive so that your rates do not look as high. It's totally true. Is SQL Server still a thing that is worth standing next to in the future? If not, what would be your bet for the next 20, 30 years? I don't think you can make a bet for 20 to 30 years. Even if you took programming languages, you might have been able to, 20 years ago would have been 2000. You couldn't have even seen C# coming in 2000. Like it wouldn't have been. There are people out there who were working with C# in the year 2000, but you wouldn't have found random people placing a bet on C# 20 years ago. It would have been very challenging. People would have been more placing their bets on, for example, Java. If you can't pick that for a programming language, there's no way that you can pick it for a persistence layer. Things are going to change. In the 10-year horizon, in the next 10 years, you're still fine with SQL Server. So worst case scenario, you could pivot yourself over to Azure SQL DB, to Azure SQL DB managed instances, hyperscale, etc. And all of those are very safe bets for the next 10 years because the amount of software that is written on them is just spectacularly huge. That's a place that I bet for the next 10 years. Next up, Angela asks, how can I blog about some of my cool work without getting in intellectual property trouble with my current company? So there's two ways to do this. So one way to do this is to sit down with your current company and say, I want to do something like a case study. I want to write about my work here, and I'm going to specifically reference my work here. What do I need to do? What's the process look like with legal, with marketing, with public relations, whoever? What's the process look like to go to build a framework of here are the things that I want to talk about, and work with a contact in legal or marketing or whoever who can vet your stuff before it goes live? That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is that you start from scratch in a clean room environment, like a totally different SQL Server at home. You build your own dev environment at home, and you build a synthetic problem that isn't the real problem, but it's something very similar. Let's say, just to say, that you were solving a problem with triggers in your work environment. Triggers that execute hundreds of times per second, and they're causing concurrency problems. What you could do is build that exact same situation at home with the Stack Overflow database, or whatever database that you want to choose to use for your demos. Build a from scratch situation, build your own load test, but it cannot take one line of copy pasted code from work. You have to start over from scratch. It is heroically more work, but then that way you can talk about it completely freely and say, if you had a problem with high volume triggers, here's the kinds of things that you would look at. Here I'm going to show it to you in the Stack Overflow database, and it's very black and white clear that it is not your company's stuff. Next up, let's see here, Bald DBA. I got a lump in my throat here. I have asthma, so especially in the mornings, I have all kinds of mocos. So I always have to kind of cough and clear my throat, and I can only do that when there's literally like no one else around. You try to do this, I'll be like, there's a good comedian who's like, one of the cool things about the pandemic is that now nobody coughs in restaurants anymore, because if you feel like you need to cough, you excuse yourself, you go out to the parking lot, you get in your car and cough, and then you drive off, and you never want to be seen again. But I kind of got a chuckle out of that. Bald DBA asks, any thoughts on transitioning from worker to manager? I'm being asked to be a supervisor for our development group, and I don't want to deal with the HR issues of my current coworkers. I'm not really a people person, but my career advancement only goes to manager. Find another job. There are other companies where you can advance your technical career without going into management, and it's typically going to be larger shops that you're going to have to go into larger and larger shops. Think General Motors, Ford, big giant global companies that have tons of people doing the same thing that you do, where you can be a technical leader as opposed to a manager. The other thing that you can do is sit down with your manager and say, look, I don't want to be a manager. I am perfectly content to be in this role for the rest of my life. You can give me cost of living raises, and I understand that I can't jump up a salary level because I'm not going to be manager, but would it be okay if I just sat in this seat and kept doing this task? I don't want to go anywhere else. I love what I do right here in this role. I'm just not really into the manager thing. I say that because I can identify with you. I have been into the management role several times in my life, and every time I've done it, I have hated it. I suck as a manager. It is a completely different set of skills that I do not have, and I have zero interest in picking those skills up. It's just not fun for me. I respect good managers. Good managers are a different breed of people than I am, and I have no interest in becoming one of those breeds. So just widen your horizons to other companies. If your current company won't let you be a technical leader for a long period of time, or if you're thinking that you need to grow your salary, then it's going to be a different job. It's just true. Next up, Performance Padawan says, do you have a sample resource plan to get into the performance tuning world? I'm an application developer interested in SQL Server performance tuning. As a matter of fact, I do. It's called my mastering classes. I teach SQL Server performance tuning classes so that you can go from zero to hero because you're a zero. That's not true. But yeah, that's what I do for a living, is I teach people performance tuning. Absolutely. If you can't pony up for my training classes are expensive. I get it. Someone has to finance this lifestyle of me going to Cabo, Mexico for 3 weeks. Thank you. Love all of you. You're wonderful. Fantastic. But if you can't afford my stuff, pick up the books from, go to brentozar.com/go/books. brentozar.com/go/books. And that has my book recommendation from folks like Itzik Ben-Gan, Pam LaHood, Pedro Lopes, Grant Fritchie. Great books that'll help you get started on your journey. Some people can learn from books. Some people can't learn at all. But Next up, Tony asks, if someone wants to get into writing code for SQL for the first time, what should be their first step as a beginner? What course or book is a great kickoff? I'm going to say something that's going to get me flamed. SQL for Dummies. That's how I learned. SQL for Dummies was the first book that I picked up. I'm sure that it's gone through so many iterations over the last 20 years. Because I'm sure I literally picked it up probably 20 years ago. But SQL for Dummies, the thing that I like about those books is that they're friendly, easy starts, and they tend to teach you ANSI compliant SQL, which you can use in MySQL, Oracle, Postgres, SQL Server, any database platform out there, Sybase. They tend to teach you the generic way of writing queries, working well across all platforms, which is, I think, a really great way to get started when your job perspective is still really wide, when you may be working at shops that will eventually have MySQL, Postgres, whatever. The next level that you should go into, and this is on that brentozar.com/go/books link, is Itzik Ben-Gan's T-SQL Fundamentals. Is just fantastic. When you hear a book called T-SQL Fundamentals, you're going to think that this is junior, meet Mr. Query. It is not. Itzik's T-SQL Fundamentals is like 468 pages of really good stuff. It's not as friendly and dancing paperclip as SQL for Dummies, but it's the second level primer that I think folks should go to. It'll take you a year to get through. You'll reread it 3-4 times inside the span of your first year and learn more stuff every time. I need to go back and reread that because I always learn something different every time I go through it. He's got another book, T-SQL Querying. It's way harder. Start with fundamentals. Next up, It Needs to Scale asks, when is SQL Server not the right tool for the job? Aside from the obvious licensing costs answer, when do you consider what or other databases to utilize? No, I think you nailed it with the licensing cost thing. When someone builds a brand new application from the ground up, my first question is, all right, what are you going to store? So when Richie and I, for example, Richie Rump is my developer at Brenno's are Unlimited, when Richie and I were building out Pace the Plan, SQL Constant Care, any number of stuff that we've gone and built, we first come from a point of what are the kinds of data that we're going to save? Are there relationships between things? Because often these days, a lot of times there aren't. And you can build really phenomenal stuff without a relational database. So as crazy as this sounds, I come at it from when someone wants to bring an application to me, I'm like, tell me why you would want to use SQL Server. Don't default there. Fight for it. Tell me why you want it. And when people do fight for it, when they tell me, oh, no, I have to have SQL Server, here are some of the answers that they give, or some of the reasons why they give. I need auditing. I need to track everyone who sees rows, because things like HIPAA compliance often require you, if you're holding patient information, you have to know who saw that patient information so that you can prove it for auditors. I need certain kinds of encryption. I need a combination of relational stuff and XML in the database. There are certain things, single sign-on security that integrates with Windows Active Directory, combination of developers working in Visual Studio plus easy reporting tools. So they want to use reporting tools that they're familiar with, whether it's Microsoft Stack or somebody else's Stack that works really well with SQL Server. But those are the kinds of ideas when somebody backs their way into SQL Server. But I use a hard sales pitch. I'm like, no, prove to me why you need SQL Server. It's expensive. Why would you do that? So, and the answers do come in. Next up, let's see here. Next up is George Jetson says, nice view. Don't venture too far from the shade of an umbrella. That's true. Not sure the old epidermis can handle too much sunshine. I do tan pretty quickly. George continues with, I am fast approaching retirement, but I don't want to stop working. Any thoughts on post-retirement gigs, DBA work, or cold beverage delivery to the man in the shade? Go back through the list of everyone you've ever worked for. Talk to them and say, would you be interested in a support contract for me to be your part-time DBA 8 hours a week? I get to pick the 8 hours that I'm going to remote in, and I'm going to do whatever maintenance and management work is necessary. If you can call me when an emergency strikes, but I can't guarantee you that I'm going to answer, and agree on what the rate structure looks like, and it may be enough to pay your vacation bills, your booze delivery bills, whatever. But the people who I know who drift into retirement do that kind of thing by talking to people that they've worked with in the past, as opposed to convincing a stranger to hire you. A stranger probably isn't going to hire you for the first time when you're not available all the time, and your rates are going to be high. Your rates are going to be a premium compared to some kid fresh out of college, whereas your prior network knows what you're worth and knows that you can accomplish a great deal in a short period of time. Let's see, and then the last one I'll do in this round, Andy says, I'm an experienced consultant of 20 plus years. I'm considering starting my own blog, but I feel that there are so many great database administrator and SQL blogs out there already. What subjects do you think still need more attention, maybe less technical and more process and governance, like architecture? The problem is people don't Google for process and governance and architecture stuff. When they do Google for it, they expect to read it at Microsoft, Azure, or Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and those places have architecture and governance type blogs or resources that you can go hit. And plus two, when you start talking about governance, then it ends up being, people want to get it from somewhere that's legally defensible. So I don't think that that's a great place to go. I'll tell you one, Secrets of Consulting by Gerald Weinberg. Gerald Weinberg passed away a few years ago, but if you search for Secrets of Consulting, Gerald Weinberg, he had a book series that did extremely well for advice for people who are starting to do consulting. I think that there's always a market for that. It's a very saturated market because people who are doing consulting in any field, whether it's management consulting, process consulting, C#, any kind of consulting, will write books like that, and the advice tends to be very generic. But if you wanted to do that, there's a huge market for it. The thing I would say is, what do you expect to get out of the blog? Like at the end of a year of working and successful blogging, you're going to look back and say, thank God I did it because blank. If you're doing it to share what you know, then just blog what you know, and you'll feel fulfilled at the end of that year. If you're doing it to make more money, then you really want to blog about whatever your target audience is Googling for. What is it that they're Googling for? And when they find you in Google several times in a row, then they're going to want to go, you know what, let's just pick up the phone and call this consultant, because they know exactly what they're talking about. But you would write for their problems that they're facing when they get hired. If you feel like you want to mentor more junior consultants into having an easier time with the challenges that you faced in the last 20 years, lay out the table of contents for a book. Lay out the table of contents for a book, what it is that you want to teach through the course of it, and then you write one blog post per set of chapters, one blog post per chapter. And then at the end of the year, if you write one blog post a week, 52 blog posts altogether, you stitch them together, you're going to have a hell of an ebook. But start with the table of contents first, so that at the end of that year, you're going to have the material. It's going to sound weird to post it publicly and then bundle it up into an ebook, but the audience of people who read a blog aren't necessarily the same audience of people who go download an ebook. I'll read ebooks on planes, or in sitting on the beach. I have a list today that I have to go read. I'll read ebooks in a different way than I read blogs. Plus, you don't have to write the blog posts in the order of the ebook. You'll pick and choose the one that you're most passionate about writing at that moment. Go write that post. And then often at the end of the year, I'll find that when the stuff that I wanted to write morphed over the course of the year. I use that technique for building training classes. Like I'll sketch out, here's the material that I need to cover in a one-day long training class. Here are the portions that I need to write for the class. Now let me go write these throughout as smaller blog posts. All right, there we go. Been talking for a while. There are still more questions inside here. I don't know. I'm going to look through here and see if there are more. I might even do one more series, although it's 4:19 now. This restaurant, one of the things that I love about being out here is this restaurant's cleaning crew comes in fairly shortly, and I'll usually sit and read. And then the cleaning crew sees me and they'll bring me fresh coffee and all that. So it's kind of nice to have, because Diet Coke only gets me so far in the mornings. All right. So thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see y'all later. Adios.